I did not expect to have my whole outlook on life change when I was doom scrolling last night, but watch this. So that video is talking about Susana Trimarco. She became a human rights activist after her daughter was kidnapped and forced into human trafficking in 2002. From the moment her daughter went missing, she went undercover to try and find her. And she spent years infiltrating different human and sex trafficking rings, many of which were operated by the local government. During the search for her daughter, she saved thousands of little girls and women from their captivity, all from a mother's love and determination to never give up hope. This is one of the most devastating and honestly most disturbing cases I have ever covered. Like, it hit me deeper than I thought it would, so let's talk about it, because it will give you a whole new perspective on life. So this is Susana Trimarco. Her life unexpectedly changed in 2002 when the most devastating thing to any parent happened. On April 3rd, 2002, her 22-year-old daughter, Maria de los Angeles, who went by Marita, went missing. She was on her way to a doctor's appointment in Miguel de Tucumán, Argentina, when a car pulled up next to her on the street. Witnesses watched as 3 men pushed her into the red car and sped off, never to be seen again. A few hours went by and Marita never came home, and Susana knew deep down that something was horribly wrong. She kind of had that mother's intuition in her gut that something was not right. So Susana and her husband Daniel set off looking for her, but it was like Marita vanished into thin air. They spent hours screaming her name into the street, just trying to see if she was there, but their fears only worsened when they ran into a sex worker on the street. This sex worker told Susana that she had heard about Marita's kidnapping, and that she'd been sold into human trafficking just like she had. On top of this, 12 other people who either saw the kidnapping or knew of it came forward, and they were telling the truth because they all described Marita to a T. So Susana went straight to the police to report her missing, but it seemed like they honestly just did not care. They had absolutely no interest in looking for her for some reason, which we'll get into later, but they told Susana that Marita was more than likely sold into sex trafficking. Because of how little they cared, Susana was left to investigate and search for her daughter on her own. She went on to say, quote, "I screamed until I couldn't scream anymore. And then I realized that I had to be strong. I had to think with my head and not just my heart. These people were powerful, and I was a nobody, and I had no money, no power, no resources. I had to be smarter than them if I wanted to get my daughter back." End quote. Luckily, one of her husband's friends, Jorge, who was a police investigator, agreed to help her in the search. Now, this is obviously really dangerous, and Susana knew that, but she started dressing up and pretending to be a sex worker so that she could go into bars and brothels in La Rioja that were known hotspots for trafficking. Susana was incredibly brave because she and Jorge raided one of these brothels, and what they found is incredibly heartbreaking and disturbing. So inside the brothel were a bunch of women and little girls, some as young as 14 years old. They barely had any clothes on, and they looked terrified. Susana said that all the girls would lower their gaze and try to cover up their bodies, but what was really disturbing is that the girls confirmed the absolute worst. Marita was there. At least she was right before the raid, but she was moved literally right before Susana and Jorge got there. So it seemed like Susana was getting closer and closer to finding her daughter, but the heartbreaking fact was that she was always just one step behind. I can't even imagine how devastating that must have felt in that exact moment, to know that your daughter was just there, that she could have been saved. It's absolutely horrible. Somehow, Susana was able to get the phone numbers of people suspected to be involved in human trafficking. So she started calling them and pretending to be a client. She told them that she wanted to buy girls, and some knew that she was undercover and lying, so they purposefully gave her false information to try and mislead her. But eventually, one of them did believe her. In 2012, Susana met up with a female trafficker and even gained access to one of their houses. Inside that house were 12 little girls and women being held hostage. The woman trying to sell them asked Susana, quote, "adults or minors?" End quote. And then she told her that each little girl was at minimum 3,500 pesos, which is equivalent to about $200 US. Susana agreed and told her that she would leave and be right back with the funds, but instead she went straight to the police station. And because of Susana, all 12 girls were rescued by the police. So as time went on, Susana, Jorge, and 3 other journalists would go undercover, and they would continue to conduct independent investigations. And time again, Susana would rescue more and more girls girls, yet none of them were ever her daughter. Eventually, Susanna got a tip that her daughter had been sent to Spain and that she was still alive. So she dropped everything and went to Spain to investigate herself. She saved 25 more girls that night from being sex trafficked, 19 of which were from Argentina too. But again, her daughter was not there. Susanna's work alone led to the release of thousands of girls and women being held in these trafficking rings, and eventually, it exposed something horrifying. Many of these human and sex trafficking rings had major ties to the police, legal system, and government officials in Argentina. And one of the main reasons why the police didn't want to help her to begin with is because some of them were directly responsible for the kidnapping and selling of Merida. In 2012, Susanna exposed 13 people who had direct ties to her daughter's disappearance. It was 7 men and 6 women, and many of them were police officers, the same ones who she begged to help find her daughter. This ended up going to trial, and initially, all 13 suspects were acquitted. But at this point, Susanna had more than enough evidence, and she testified all of it at the trial. She refused that verdict, so she ended up meeting with the president of Argentina, who actually agreed that these 13 people were responsible for selling her daughter into human trafficking. Not only did he help impeach the judge who gave the innocent verdict for corruption, but he also helped in getting 10 out of the 13 suspects charged with Merida's kidnapping and sexual exploitation. Even though Susanna has continued saving countless women and girls from this nightmare, she has never found her daughter. And whether she is alive or not remains a mystery. This has never stopped Susanna from continuing on though. She will not rest until she finds her daughter. She went on to create the Maria de los Angeles Foundation, named after her daughter. This foundation provides legal help, psychological support for trafficking victims, and it also helps train judges, prosecutors, other members of law enforcement on how to handle these types of cases. As of today, this foundation has helped over 800 court cases on behalf of kidnapped girls and women in Argentina. Because of her amazing work, Argentina passed a law that makes the abduction and sexual exploitation of a person a federal offense. I can't believe this wasn't already a federal offense, but I'm happy it is now, I guess. Because of her, rescue offices were also established that provides legal assistance to victims. And because of Susanna, she has exposed the human trafficking industry, and she also highlighted the high-profile people involved in it. But like I said, what she did is incredibly dangerous. She didn't even tell her husband that she was doing these undercover investigations and meeting with these traffickers. She risked her own life saving all of these women, all in hopes that she would be the one to save her daughter too. Even today, she still gets death threats from people involved in the human trafficking industry. Several men have called her, threatening to cut off her head and throw it into the river, and she's almost been purposefully run over countless times. At one point, her house was even burned down, so to say she's brave and selfless is an understatement. In 2007, the U.S. Department of State honored Susanna with the International Women of Courage Award, and in 2013, she was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Although the people responsible for kidnapping Merida and selling her were charged, like I said, she is still missing. Susanna has gone on to say that she found and rescued victims who had been in captivity for 12 years. So to her, she thinks that her daughter might still be alive. She went on to directly confront her daughter's kidnappers and said, quote, "If I can't have peace, you will never have peace until she's given back to me." End quote. So to this day, 24 years later, Susanna still searches. She looks high and low, hoping that one day she will be reunited with her daughter again.